Hello and welcome to Beginners Academy. Uh, we have talks about uh, information for new hams and hams returning to the hobby. And tonight we're going to cover buying your first power supply for your ham radio. So why would you want to buy a power supply? Well, after you get your technician license and you graduate from using a handheld radio, you'll eventually want to have a radio in your home, either 2 meters and maybe all band radio or HF radio. So those will require a power supply. And that is our topic for the night. And for us that have been around a while, power supplies have definitely changed over the years. Tube rigs are quite different from our modern rigs, so to speak, and they require different voltages, and in particular, some high voltage for the tubes. So a lot of radios, very old radios, would have the power supply built into the radio. So all you had to do was plug it in, okay? And one of our members here was talking about mobile radios that had tubes, and they required a vibrator power supply that would take DC and step it up for the tubes. So you won't be dealing with that unless you get into boat anchor radios. The modern radios have pretty much standardized on 12 volts DC, and they're using transistors and a solid state, and they're practically computers. So they pretty much standardized on 12 volts DC, although some rigs can take a wider range of voltage, some of the Yaesu rigs. But for the most part, the modern rig needs 12 volts, and the power supply will convert your mains voltage, like 115 volts AC to 12 volts DC, which is really the ticket for using your radios at home. Of course, transceivers like the one you see on the right bottom could be 10-watt radios or 5-watt radios or 100-watt radios. So they have different current requirements at 12 volts. And over on the right, we've got a MFJ power supply on top of the ICOM radio. So people have all kinds of rigs. I put a few examples here. The ICOM 7300 is very popular for high frequency HF. In terms of voltage, most of the ICOM radios specify 13.8 volts plus or minus 15%. And that lets them be used for mobile, and but the current at 100 watts, which is the maximum power for the radio, is 21 amps. So you would have your 13.8 plus or minus at 21 amps. And Uh, so for your particular radio, you want to look up the maximum power requirement. For the Yaesu 991A, Yaesu says it's 23 amps for 100 watts. The VHF, UHF radios usually at the most run 50 watts, like the ICOM 5100. And so the current's about half, about 13 amps. And one of many low power rigs is the ICOM 705 that runs 10 watts and the current is 3 amps. So you have a range of amperes for the different radios. Well, in the beginning, along the way, most power supplies were of the linear type. And so I'm going to try to distinguish between linear power supplies and switching power supplies. And I borrowed some text here, but the linear design uses a beefy transformer, usually fairly heavy, to take the AC input, like 120 or 240, and step down the voltage, then rectify and filter the input into a DC output of 13.8. So these power supplies are often large, heavy, and more expensive than switching power supplies. Many old timers believe they're better because they're less likely to generate RF noise. Well, I will go ahead and cover the switching power supply, which is a more modern design. And in fact, I think wall warts use the same principle here. But with switching power supplies, the AC voltage is converted directly to DC and filtered. This high voltage DC is fed to a power oscillator that switches it on and off at a rate of about 20 to 500 kilohertz. The resulting pulsating DC can be applied to a transformer for conversion to 13.8. Switching power supply is also smaller, less expensive, and more efficient. Most modern versions are built to suppress RF noise. Well, I guess when switching power supplies came around, some of them weren't filtered properly and created noise in your radio. But all the switchers I've used, I've never noticed any noise. Now, a funny thing happened. Wayne Burdick of Elecraft, when they came out with the KX3, he said that the KX3 had such a fantastic receiver that it deserved a linear power supply. So all us followers of Elecraft went out and got linear power supplies because Wayne said that's the thing to do. but if you do some research, you'll find there is a difference in usually the size and weight, and switching is smaller. But you can have your pick, and there's linear power supplies available as well as switching. So, so a key thing to look at when you're shopping for power supplies is the current that it can produce. If your radio is running 100 watts, it's going to be at that specified current. And so I just have 3 example power supplies. A Samlex says it's good for continuous 30 amps and peak 36 amps. one of my favorite power supplies, the Lenco DM430T, doesn't give continuous or peak, but maybe it's peak. It's max 30 amps. So usually they'll have continuous and peak, and really I suggest paying the most attention to the continuous number for comparison's sake. And the Astron switcher is rated for a continuous 25 amps and a peak of 30 amps. So actually all three of these power supplies would cover the 100-watt radios that, that are needing 23 amps or so. You're pretty much covered. I've got a note here. The FT, and I came up with this, by the way. The FT8 mode has a high duty cycle and could stress your rig, your tuner, and power supply at full power. So this usually isn't a major problem unless something in your station is not rated for full power. Can you speak to that, Bob? Bob Albers?
Yeah, I found out the hard way that my tuner was not compatible with FT8 at 100 watts, even though it had a 125 watt rating. Turned out there was an error in the manual version that I had, and it worked fine for 2 months, and then all of a sudden it let the magic smoke out. So the nice people at LDG sent me a new unit because I pointed out to them that the data sheet they had posted online said it was good for 100 watts digital, and they have since issued a new data sheet that says it's good for 50 watts digital, which is what I'm running now, and hasn't smoked yet.
Right. Well, I don't want to scare anybody away from FT8, but it is a little different. Sideband has a lower duty cycle, so it's easier on the power supply.
Yeah.
So you might want to be pretty conservative on your power supply if you plan to run FT8 at full power, which you really don't need to do, in my opinion. You can also turn down your power for FT8.
You just got me to look at the specs for this little PowerWorks switcher that I have the 7100 running on. It says it's good for 25 amps total. I assume that's peak, but I think I only draw like 21 amps. 20 or 21 on the 7100 at 100 watts.
Yeah.
And now I'm running 50 watts, so it's no big deal. But
yeah,
this thing never smoked, but it's always good to double check those specs before you end up letting the smoke out.
Right. Okay, well, there are just dozens of power supply models out there, and they have some of them have a lot of features and some of them don't. Some features you might consider is an adjustable voltage. You may want to increase the voltage a little bit to overcome some loss or resistance in your wiring, possibly if your radio is not putting out full power. To keep up with what's going on, to help you troubleshoot and so forth, you can get a power supply with a voltmeter and amp meter. And then you further have a choice of digital or analog, or you could have no meters. So I believe what the vendors do is they put these nice features on there and they'll charge a little bit more for it. The power connections can be binding posts or power poles. A lot of power supplies will have binding posts on the back and maybe power poles on the front. Power poles are, I'm referring to Anderson power poles that are convenient, standard for connecting your power supply to radios and accessories and so forth. And some power supplies have bonus outputs, maybe a cigarette socket, or if it's really cool, maybe a USB outputs. Another feature, I'll call it, is compact size. So they are really making some very compact power supplies that will run your 100-watt radio. And we'll look at one of those. Popular brands, Astron has been around forever. And they made linear power supplies, and they got into the switcher power supply business also. Linco, I use a lot of those. MFJ has several or many power supply models, and Samlex. Does anybody else have a popular brand beyond what?
Kenwood, I don't know if they make it, but you know, Kenwood and ICOM have their own brand of power supplies to match their radio.
I have a Daiwa, and it's a straight out, you know, it's not switching. It'll handle 30 amps. It's got a meter in there, and it's really good quality.
Yeah, Daiwa and Jetstream.
Yeah.
And yeah, Jim mentioned matching power supplies. Well, if you want a matching power supply, you'll pay a little extra for it. But if you want one, you can get it usually for ICOM and Kenwood radios in particular.
I like that little PowerWorks switcher. It works real well.
Right. Thank you, Susie.
Good treat.
Apparently Susie likes it too.
Yeah, she's voting here. Okay, well, yeah, PowerWorks has a good power supply. So you just have lots of choices. The one at the top left for $189 roughly, Samlex. I just like the look of that power supply. I like the meters.
Yeah, it's classic.
Hey, Greg.
Yes.
Let me speak to that Samlex. I've got one hooked up to a 991, not 99, not 991A, but to a 991. And I have been using that combination for about 6 years, running digital at 80 or 90 watts, and they just sit there and cook.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah.
I have a real good one. It's an MFJ here. MFJ 4230, and it's a little bitty one. It's the same thing as that Astron there, but it has just 1 meter, and you can select it back and forth. It's an analog meter, but boy, it's really precise. Got real fine little markings on it, and it's tiny. It's real light, and it'll handle 30 watts, and it's variable.
Or 30 amps.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's now, on the other hand, that one you got there in the lower right-hand side, which is one that I bought off of you, Greg, one time.
it's similar to, yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice one, it's analog, but that thing weighs, man.
Yeah,
I think I remember you bringing it over.
yeah.
It's heavy.
Well, yeah, well, some people hams are in the habit of having very nice, heavy power supplies, and they can get their wish with Astron. Yeah. So yeah, on the lower right hand is a linear power supply, and it's a little more expensive, in fact. I want to call attention to the Linko on the lower left. It is about as small as a power supply can get, and I found that it works great. It has digital out meters, so to speak, but just very impressed with what you get in a very small package. So the picture doesn't do it justice, but it's very small. And the upper right hand is a switching Astron. So as you can see, and it has some USB output, some power poles. It has a little hole in the side for adjusting the voltage. The Linko has a knob you can adjust the voltage with, and so sometimes you might have a different purpose for your power supply for some special project, and you could change the voltage. So this is just 4 power supplies out of 100. I will say, when I was doing research for this, I kept running into not available. So the models are out there, but with supply chain issues, you may have some problems. But I'm sure you're going to get one or another. But you might have to wait on one that's on back order.
Hey, Greg,
Yes, Frank.
you elaborate a little bit on what the difference is between the transformers in there and why the space industry developed the switching power supplies to eliminate heavy weight and stuff.
Well, I think you're covering it, Frank. I didn't know it was the space industry.
Yeah, the analog ones have a 60 cycle, and it needs a big core to be able to transform the energy from the primary to the secondary. And so the space industry, they had to come up with something. So they decided to go up to like higher frequency, and they were able to use like a small ferrite core to do the same thing, about 1/10 the weight, just using higher frequency. And that's how how these switching power supplies came to be.
Yeah, that's good info. And well, we're
Yeah.
benefiting from that
Yeah,
because we can get lighter and lighter and more efficient. Unfortunately, the poor man's version of these are wall warts, and those are some of those are don't have proper filtering and do create RF noise. So you may have a very good clean RF as far as RFI power supply, but you could have a wall wart in your house that causes problems.
yeah,
Well,
there are a lot
here's
of cheap
one.
wall warts up there. There are some still that are still like analog, But the little portable sideboot package that I made with a battery, when I go to people's homes and they got noise, well, with the little radio, I'll be able to run it once I turn the power off to the whole house. And then if I turn it back on and the noise comes back, then it's something going on in the house. That way, then I can start unplugging things one at a time. Because like if you try to get rid of noise and you turn the power off, your radio goes off. So you want a radio that stays on, and that way eliminates. And then you just start unplugging wall warts until you find the one, not the one that's making the noise.
Right.
At one point though, the noise was coming in through the coax cable from the cable company. And we were going crazy because even though we turned the power off, we still were picking up noise. Finally, I was able to move the radio around and it got really loud when I got it near the cable coming in. And then we just had to call the cable company about it. I think they put some ferret beads on it or something. I don't know, but they eliminated it. So those are things that you might consider. If you start blaming the power supply for the noise, you have to do a little bit of process of elimination.
Here's a small one.
Well, actually, we can't see it, but when we get to the end of the slides, I'd like you to
Okay.
show it. Yeah, thank you, Chris. Actually, here's one. I use a lot of QRP rigs, and it only, well, they require a 10-watt rig should be 4 amps or less. And one popular power supply looks like a laptop power supply, but it turns out it's a very clean, well-regulated 4 amp supply from Pro Audio Engineering. And actually, usually with QRP rigs, I'm using battery, but if I go to a hotel or something, I might take this power supply.
Every time I go to a thrift store and I see one that's 12 volts or 15 volts and it's 4 amps, 5 amps, I
Yeah.
grab it. You can get them for like $1.99, at the
Yeah.
thrift stores. Yeah.
Well, this one's a little more, and the vendor claims that it's better than all those others, but you can make your own decision.
Hey, Greg,
Yes,
Uh,
Ken.
one thing, I play with Raspberry Pis, and
Yeah,
they sell wall wart supplies, somewhere around 2 amp. But those are nice and quiet. But like people have said, there are trashy ones out there, but they also, if you pay attention, you can get a good clean,
yeah,
2 amp or whatever power supply to use with stuff like Raspberry Pis.
If you have an old router, the power supplies for those routers are usually 12 volts and they're sometimes 3 amps. But I've had one from a router that made a lot of noise, and I had another one that was absolutely clean. But like from one of these old routers for your internet,
right.
they always come with one of those, and if you got rid of an old router, you might want to hang on to the power supply.
Right. So you kind of have a choice. You can buy the type of power supplies that we've shown from vendors, or you can take a more do-it-yourself or junk box approach, and if you're careful, you could have a very good success with that.
You can take a old computer power supply. They're pretty cheap. You can go to yard sales and you can pick up an old computer for $5. the power supplies are very easy to redo to make 5 volts and 12 volts at some pretty heavy currents also. There's lots of articles on converting them, and I've converted a lot of them. They work real well.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's another good point. Yeah.
And those are real clean too.
Yep.
They need a load to, don't they, Jim?
On some radios though, particularly like the ICOMs, don't run on 12 volts, but they like better 13.8. Not so much the Yazes I've experienced, the ICOMs.
Yeah.
Some of the
Yeah, that's the
ICOMs.
problem with the computer supply. You're not gonna get 13.6 nominally.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There are some, but if you're a little bit risky, there is, some of them have a little potentiometer that you can play with to make the voltage go up, but not too many of them.
Yeah.
You gotta go inside there, mess with it a little bit. I'm sure Jim has done that,
Yeah.
right, Jim?
Yeah, they've got little trimmers in there for a little bit of variance, not much. They're pretty much 12 volts.
Yeah,
And, like
Yeah,
you said,
I've
some
seen
radios,
some,
some radios can handle that okay. But I think the 705, I don't have one. Greg's got one. I believe they start their voltage rating at like 9 volts, don't they? Don't they say like 9 to 15 volts or something like that?
well,
They go all the way-
actually, it runs off a battery pack that's like 7 to 8 volts. So
Yeah,
it can run on
there's a
that.
7.8
Yeah.
and there's a 9.6 battery.
Yeah.
It could be one of those, yeah. You don't get as much, you don't get as much power, but the radio will function.
And
Okay.
and the Yaesu, what is it, 817 and 818?
Yeah, they have a small
are-
battery too, yeah.
Yeah, and they can run at different lower than 12 volts.
yeah, the 857 Yaesu, I did a lot of research on that because I wanted to make go boxes. And that little radio, I'd seen it down to 10 volts and it was still putting out close to 100 watts. Where
Yep.
like the ICOMs, once it gets down below 12, the power starts dropping up real quick.
Yeah, the ICOM 7100, if it gets down to 11.7, its little computer shuts down.
Yeah, it just
It's-
drops right out.
It's over.
Yeah,
So actually when you're running 100 watts, you'll get some voltage drop, and if it gets below 11.7, it just will shut off. So
another good point is that if you run a long cable between your power supply and your radio, you'd be surprised how much voltage drop you have. I've checked it out even with like number 14 wire, maybe 6 foot long. I've seen as much as a 1.5 voltage drop.
yeah,
And that's
Well-
why ICOM seems to give you thicker cables when you buy them
yeah.
because they're more touchy to voltage drop.
Well, that's one reason maybe to have a power supply that's adjustable. So if you're having a problem, you
Yeah.
might increase the voltage at the power supply. Well, I think this is it's not necessarily a problem, but not all, but most power supplies have fans, and desktop computers have fans, and it can be a pet peeve, if it's a noisy fan. So how much a fan turns on and how noisy it is varies. And so it's hard to know till you buy the thing. So you might want to, yeah,
I bought an MFJ power supply, and it was advertised as whisper quiet. I said, oh, that sounds good. So I hooked that sucker up, and it sounded like a jet engine was taking off.
yeah,
And I looked at the schematic, and it had a speed control circuit in there. But if you look at the circuit board, the components were missing. They didn't, even bother to put them on the board. I don't know if it was a supply chain issue or somebody just cost reduced the darn thing and figured we wouldn't mind it.
Yeah.
It was so loud it'd drive you out of the room, but it was always on max fan speed. I sent that one back and ended up with the PowerWorks, and it's real nice.
Yeah,
It rarely turns on more than a whisper.
On the Maritron, the analog Maritron, what tends to happen with that is the cabinet starts to vibrate. In the home, you have to like
well,
put little shims in there or something to keep it from going.
that's one thing I didn't like about that linear Astron was actually, yeah, the cabinet vibrating. So I sold it to you,
Yeah,
Frank.
I know.
Well, I put a bunch of wedges in between
Yeah.
that.
Well, anyway, you're well, one suggestion is to look at reviews and see what people are saying about the fans. So it's kind of hit or miss. You have to cross your fingers and buy one and hope it's not a problem. So
But that's why it's good to be part of a club where you can just have questions and people that have experienced it can tip you off about them, ahead of time.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of reviews, a go-to place for ham reviews is eham.net. And I just got a screenshot there of the power supply category, and that's just the beginning of a list, that may have 100 different power supplies in there, and ratings and reviews. So that's something to check out. That goes for pretty much every piece of amateur radio equipment you could buy. There's generally a review on it, and you can submit your own reviews for EHAM also. All right, well, I came up with some power supply buying suggestions. Okay, and I guess a comment here is that there are many power supplies from the major ham vendors that will satisfy your 100-watt rig's needs. So there's a lot of them to choose from, but you want to double check the amp rating against what your rig or potential rig draws, the current draw. I'm going to suggest go with a switching power supply unless you just want it to be different. Well, not different, but you can choose a linear if you like, but I would suggest going with switching. It's going to be less expensive and smaller, and generally they're not a problem with RF noise these days. Of course, review the features that you want. Do you want those analog meters? Do you want extra outputs and power poles and all? The price, the more little features you have, the price will go up a bit. So you can just see what fits your budget. And you don't have to sink major dollars into your power supply. One of the power supplies that Alinco 430 is like $130. It runs my 100-watt radios, no problem. So you really don't have to go beyond that. You could, although there are power supplies getting up to $300. So the choice is yours, but you don't have your bang. you're probably better to spend the extra $100 on your rig or your antenna than your power supply. Now, you don't want to have a junk power supply, and I don't know, things are getting cheaper every day, but be wary of really, really cheap power supplies or ones. There's a lot of power supplies that aren't 30 amp power supplies. So they're cheaper, but you don't really want to get a hold of one. And a used power supply can be okay, but if you come by one on a estate sale and it's been sitting around for 30 years, it might not be that good. It might be bad. So you might want to test it.
On that note,
Yes.
Greg, particularly in Puerto Rico, when I was down there, a lot of Kenwood radios were getting fried from the Kenwood power supplies. They were analog power supplies. For some reason, the regulator would go goofy, and then it would go like to spike up to 25 volts. And they do have a Zener rectifier on the output that's supposed to limit that, so it doesn't exceed like 14 or something volts. But it got to the point where it would just blow that apart, and it would send like 25 volts to the radio, and it damaged the radio. It
Yeah.
happened at least 3 times to people over there. And they were always the Kenwood, the old Kenwood power supplies, the analog ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most of the newer power supplies have over voltage protection. And so you're probably better off getting a modern power supply.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a mobile radio that you're using as a base in your home and it runs 50 watts at the most, it may only need 13 amps, but I'm going to suggest going ahead and getting a 30 amp supply, because hopefully you'll upgrade to general and you will have a 100-watt rig, maybe for HF. So
another pointer
Yep.
that I may put in here is though, don't ever use the radio without a fuse. If the fuse is supposed to blow if you exceed 25 amps, and even if you connected the polarity in reverse, there's a rectifier on the input of the radio that would be a shunt, and it would blow that fuse. But if you don't have a fuse, it'll blow that rectifier, and the voltage will go inside. So it's protected for reverse polarity, but it only works if you have a fuse in the line.
yeah,
So
that's a good point.
Don't ever eliminate the fuse.
Very good point.
Yeah.
Most the cables that come with your radios have 1 or 2 fuses, but
Yeah.
but you might get in a situation where you're not using those cables.
Yeah.
And another one, I've used one power supply for 2-meter base radio and a HF rig. The rigs take the most current or need the most current when they're transmitting, but since you're one person, you're almost never transmitting on both, unless you're running FT8. So, well, before FT8, you're usually either talking on one rig or the other. So you may be able to get away with one power supply, but you need to
Good
take
place to start.
Yeah,
Yeah, but you talk about FT8, which is a 50-50 duty cycle,
right.
but RTTY, PSK, and all those others, you know,
Yeah,
you get on
RTTY.
RTTY and you
Right.
can do a lot more than 50-50. You're quite often you might run 3 minutes before you realize your rig is
Yeah,
you can fry an egg
Yeah.
on it or something. So it's not you know, FT8 is not the
Yeah, I'm
bad guy
let's just,
that you think it is, okay?
I'm just picking on FTA.
Well, I know, but I
Because
mean,
everybody
you need
loves
to
it,
know,
that's
you need to
why.
know all digital rigs can be
Yeah,
subject to that. It's how
That's
long,
true.
it's how long you transmit, not, it's not the mode, it's how long. you
Yeah.
transmit.
that's
And
right.
And then if your
Okay.
ratio from transmit to receive. And 50-50 is considered by a lot of electrical experts, I guess, electronic experts. You don't want to exceed that on the transmit side. Unless your radio can stand it, you know. You got
Yeah.
a Collins KWS-1 where you can put the key down and go to Disney World and come back and it'll still be going. So
All right. Well, at this
they
point,
don't make too many of those anymore.
Yes,
I'm-
sir.
I'm going to leave the slides. And here's our group for Beginners
we lost
Academy
somebody.
today.
We lost them. Who'd we lose?
I don't know, but Chris is
Chris?
going to show us a power supply that's small.
Okay.
Yeah, this was Jim's suggestion, actually, I think.
Oh, yeah. Those are nice.
$27.
They're fairly inexpensive, very small.
Guess how many amps?
I've
Is
got
that a Meanwell power supply?
no, it's some kind of commercial, something that
It's 30 amps.
some warehouse or somebody got a hold of.
30 amps continuous. It's a
I use a
S360-12.
24-volt one. Got a Collins R392, which requires 28
Yeah.
volts, which is kind of hard to find. So I use a 24-volt, just like Chris showed you there.
It does
works
have a
quite-
fan.
works
It's
quite
good
well.
noise. Yeah, Jim mentioned this to me
Yeah.
and I got it off of
Oh, they're very
Amazon.
inexpensive. Very inexpensive. What'd you pay for that?
37 Canadian, 27 US.
Yeah, there you go.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And if you look it up on eHam, there's only one review of it, but the guy's used it for years. 22 amps continuous, no problem. When it says 30, that's actually continuous. And it weighs about 2 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We have we had a doorbell system at our church. We got like 16 entry exit doors around the building. It's a pretty big building. And we had one power supply running all the doorbells and everything. And I replaced it with one of those 24-volt ones. And we haven't had any problems with it.
All right. Well, do we have any questions or additional guidance for buying your first power supply?
Yeah, I noticed one thing, and I wish they would fix it, especially with talking about the Anderson power plugs. From the early days of whatever it was, probably the phone company, they've come up with a standard that red is always on the right as you're looking at it, as the power is coming towards you. And I noticed that in the Astron, on one Astron, they had it that way, but on the other one, they had it the other way. So even the same company can't figure it out.
Yeah.
If you ever worked for the phone company or you ever took any courses where they use the phone company color codes and everything, they talk about the 5 reds, the red right, ridge, ring, return. So that's all of those are red.
Sometimes the positive side is a black wire with white stripes.
Oh Lord, yeah.
Yes,
I can't.
and that's an automotive is mostly, huh?
Yeah. Well,
Well, I ran into that. Yeah.
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 So something to pay attention to.
It's always
Indeed.
good to have a meter and double check everything before you hook
Right.
it up.
Right.
No doubt.
Okay.
Even when I make a Anderson power pole extension of some kind, I don't automatically hook it to my radio. I always check it with the meter before I hook up the radio.
Yeah.
PowerWorks makes a nice little inline ammeter, voltmeter, watt meter that has
Yes.
power poles on each end. And you can just plug it in line with your cord and then you can get the continuous readout of your current consumption or whatever you're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well-
there's several of those on the market, that not necessarily the ones that have power poles, but I've got one that has power poles on it.
Roy, what power supply are you using?
I got the PowerWorks. It's
Okay,
it's 30 amps peak and 25 continuous.
yeah,
And
that's-
I've got 2 rigs on it. But
There
like
you
you
go.
say, I only talk on 1 rig at a time.
Most days.
all right.
I use a
What-
big old Astron amper, but like Frank says, it hums like crazy.
Yeah,
To the point I've got a timer on it so that it switches off at night, so it doesn't keep people awake.
Well,
Sometimes
that's-
it's the plates in the power transformer that vibrate. And if you can open it up and tighten those screws down, you can quiet it down a little bit.
I'll give that a try. Once I'm back on the island.
I've had that experience on furnace transformers.
Yeah,
The furnaces work on 24-volt AC. And I've eliminated some of that hum by just dropping some crazy glue on it.
yeah.
It would, soak into the lamination to stop it.
You could get a big C clamp and clamp it on there, and you could do dual duty. Not only would it clamp the vibrations, but it would act as a heat sink.
Well,
There you go.
the clamp cost more than the transformer did those.
That was a joke, Frank. That was a
Yeah.
joke, Frank. A joke, Frank.
I was thinking of doing that.
all right. Well, if you are just getting started, hopefully this information will be helpful. There's most of it straightforward, but there's some nuances, and we covered a lot of those tonight. So we'll post this on YouTube and on Panama City Amateur Radio Club. We have kind of a library of talks for beginners. So check that out. All
Okay,
right.
Before you leave,
Yes,
a
Jim.
plug for the Montgomery Ham Fest coming up in 2 weeks. Montgomery, Alabama. It's at a very nice place. Adequate parking, camping. I'd say it's a medium to small ham fest. Put on by a club that actually knows what they're doing. They put on a very good ham fest. So
And they're
If
very
you're up there-
hospital, they're
Huh?
very hospital to the Panama City guys. They
yeah,
treated us,
because I won the radio last time.
yeah, and then they made sure we all wanted the radios
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, I called them. They said, "I'm sorry, all the tables are gone." Then
Yeah,
All right.
don't come.
All right.
But I'm going to be going up there, and it's it's a Friday.
What are
Saturday.
the hours, Jim? I saw it online and I think it said it opened at 9, but it didn't say how long it would run. And I didn't know if it was worth driving up there 3 hours.
It's actually open on Friday at around noon, I think, and then Saturday opens at 8 or so. It goes to about
Oh, okay.
2 or 3 o'clock, I think. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
going to go up Friday, and
Well-
I may sleep in the parking lot or take my tent on something. They've got a little campground in the back there. I'm not sure.
Well,
That's not a big deal. I usually just take my tent. All I'm gonna do is sleep in it, so no big deal.
Susie is planning on attending, so
Okay, you're gonna be there? All right.
is she going to take you?
yes,
Okay,
She's driving now.
she's booking a flight up
That's
there.
not too far from you, is it, Greg? From Dothan, that's not.
Yeah,
too
yeah,
far.
we're a little closer, a couple hours.
What is it, about 80? Well,
I
from here to
don't know.
there, from Panama City, it's 180. So it's probably
So I
about,
think it's
it's
about,
probably, Dothan's probably about halfway.
yeah. All right.